Dun. And apparently we're live, although I'm not on LinkedIn yet. That's odd. Why am I not on LinkedIn yet? Something's not worked quite right, Damien. It's not live. Oh, now it has. Now it's finally gone live. There we go. Why am I not on LinkedIn?
Yeah. Popped up for me.
There we go.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this LinkedIn Live. Why Wellbeing is a business critical talent strategy. Here at Talent Diagnostic Solutions, we help organisations with their people strategy, including recruitment strategy and retention. And I want to introduce our panel of people here today. So I'm the founder of Talent Diagnostic Solutions. I've been a recruiter for 24 years with a background as a management consultant, and really happy to be here today. I also do performance coaching, and so very happy to be here today and introduce you to Matt Adamson.
Thank you, Damien. Yes, I am Damien's co-founder in Talent Diagnostic Solutions. But this topic that we're talking on today is really a bit of an intersection of my two worlds, because whilst I also have a background in recruitment, latterly with UBS out in Asia Pacific, I also am now a coach who focuses on careers, work, and getting that to work for you, essentially, and avoid the same burnout traps that I fell into at the end of my career. So this topic of well-being is really where my two businesses intertwine effectively. And talking of burnout, I'd like to pass over to Rachel.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Austin. I'm the founder of Austin Advisory, which is my own consulting company. I'm an organizational psychologist professionally, and always worked in the professional services field around talent management consulting, and very much specializing in psychometric assessment. For the last 10 years, I have been specializing in the area of burnout prevention. And after my own personal experience of burnout, decided to apply my expertise in psychometrics to design a scientific tool called Aura to help organizations measure and manage stress proactively. And lastly, I will now pass over to Patrick.
Thanks, Rachel. I am a recruiter through and through. I've been a recruiter for 25 plus years. I actually worked with Matt at UBS. And after that, also at Credit Suisse, running teams there, both regionally, globally. In the last few years, I have joined Inclusive Search. We are a firm that passionately believes in trying to uncover and nurture diverse talent for firms that are looking to bring in the best talent available in the market. So it's always about the best person for the job, but we are very much dedicated towards finding talent that often gets overlooked in the market. And that's me.
Thanks, Patrick. And why are we talking about well-being as a critical talent attraction and retention strategy? I think there's some really interesting statistics to highlight. According to Gallup, in some research from last year, 48% of employees globally report experiencing daily stress at work, and that's been the highest for years. And a McKinsey report from a couple of years ago said that burnout is cited as one of the top reasons people left jobs during the Great Resignation. So it's a really important subject for any organisation wanting to both recruit and retain their best people. And so I think let's look at the talent landscape today. How are employee expectations changing?
Well, I can kick off a little bit there, because I do speak to people who are looking at jobs and looking at careers as part of my coaching business. Obviously, we look at the ways that businesses recruit through Talent Diagnostic Solutions, but in terms of actually speaking to the candidates themselves, it's more through career coaching that I do. And I would say there is a real sort of focus. Obviously, I'm speaking to a client group who recognize that something is wrong in their career and that there is perhaps too much stress by their very nature. But really, when they're looking for new employers, a huge amount is, am I going to be able to do a good job here without sacrificing my sanity? It really comes up very regularly, and it's something that I work with the clients in terms of preparing them for interview. What research are they going to do with the organization to make sure it appears to be a good firm? What sort of questions are they going to ask to make sure that they can get clarity of whether this is going to be the right environment for them? And this sort of stuff is backed up by statistics. There was just referencing a LinkedIn workplace learning report which said 70% of job seekers say a company's commitment to employee well-being is a key factor in deciding whether to join. So in that sense, it's not just a nice to have on the side and a box to tick. It's something that I believe candidates really do see as being important. Patrick, I don't know, what's your thoughts? You're obviously very active with candidates looking to hire diverse talent.
Well, I think as we spoke before this, it's still the number one driver in the market. The first thing people ask about is money. We have a cost of living crisis. People often aren't in a position where they can sacrifice money, certainly to go backwards. So money is still key. But then the very next question is, tell me about the flexibility. Tell me about the hours. Tell me about the culture. People want to know the firms, and they want to know that they will have a work-life balance, that it will feel like a place that they want to belong. And I still, that really is key to an awful lot of people. It's hard to be, talking about different people in different stages of their careers. More junior people have different priorities to people more senior, those with families, people from different types of groups and representation. It does differ, but flexibility is often the key. People are being made, certainly post-COVID, to sacrifice the work-life balance that they've had. Certainly those with families, they don't want to be in the office, and they will often trade a pay increase or a salary increase to keep and maintain or even increase their flexibility. And that feeds into their well-being and also that sense of belonging, because they can't bring themselves to work in true style and an authentic style if they're constantly having to worry about what's going on at home and how they juggle those priorities. So I certainly think flexibility is still very much the key.
Yeah, I mean, I can reference a very recent example. I'm fortunate enough that I also work as an associate coach for a much larger coaching firm, and when they're going through maybe rounds of redundancies, or not the firm themselves, but their clients are going through a round of redundancies, or they just generally want to give their people career coaching, they will work with that big firm, and then they farm it out to trusted associates like myself. And I was speaking to a couple of people from one firm recently, and they were looking at a redundancy situation, and they were extremely worried because they have got very used to, and their whole work-life balance is reliant on them being in the office an absolute maximum of 3 days a week. And so by default, any employer that wasn't open to it being 3 days a week, it was just for them a hard no. They were not going to consider looking at those kind of organizations. And so, firms talk about wanting to hire the best talent, the right talent, the most appropriate talent. And I do think they are putting a real restriction on themselves if they won't meet that flexibility. Because at the end of the day, we've got enough information coming out of COVID and all the work everyone had to do at home there that, working at home for portions of the week does not significantly impact. If anything, it increases productivity.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add in here is, the only thing I would add in here is to consider the number of people that have also experienced burnout. And we know that that has soared over the last few years. There's various stats, but some stats say 1 in 4 people have experienced a burnout over the last couple of years. And for anyone who has experienced burnout, that fundamentally does change your expectations of an employer. So for me personally, I know I would never go back to work for an employer where there weren't conditions which would support me to work in a healthy way. And it's sort of changed changed what I look for in an employer. So I think that's another kind of consideration here. I think that there's a huge number of people who have had that actually quite traumatic experience of burnout that does really influence what they look for in an employer. So I do think employers that place well-being at the core is a major competitive frontier for their employer brand.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you, Charles Corwell from Hong Kong, for showing those statistics there and for joining. So global well-being for workers is struggling, with Gallup data showing only 33% of global employees are thriving, 58% struggling and 9% suffering. That's actually quite extraordinary statistics. And Charles also shared that the World Health Organization estimates $1 trillion in lost productivity annually due to depression and anxiety, which is absolutely shocking, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Going back to what you said earlier, Matt, as well, in terms of looking at what employees' expectation for joining an organisation. A couple of years ago, my former employer, Robert Half, did a very, very thorough survey of people within the UK and looked at what people want in addition to money. They looked at different benefits people were looking for. Nobody mentioned flexibility, and that was actually quite a shock. But the reason why people didn't mention that, and when people then asked why wasn't flexibility mentioned, was that that's simply a prerequisite. And so people want the money to be right and flexibility, and then they look at the benefits. And so it wasn't considered to be an add-on, an additional benefit. So I think that was really powerful. There's a question here from Andrew Tucker. So for the recruiters, how much do you find firms are willing to show flexibility in working practice? What would your thoughts be on that that comment?
On that question, yeah.
I mean, it's a difficult one to answer, isn't it? Really, because I mean, larger organisations. I mean, my background is financial services. The big banks the majority of them are insisting on everyone going back in 5 days. The small to medium firms are still able to retain either full flexibility or it's 2-3 days in the office. So again, it does depend, and outside of that industry, but I think there's still a fair amount of flexibility. I think we'll probably see 3 days, maybe even 4 days in the office being much more of the norm. The much smaller firms can hopefully retain as much flexibility as they can, but interestingly, I think certainly in certain markets where the job market is not so good and the options are limited, people are having to suck this up and stay where they are, which is causing them stress and anxiety. But when the job market picks up, I really do think people that are stuck with little flexibility will start moving purely for that reason, to go and find the firms that can offer them what they're used to and what gives them that sense of either well-being or happiness, just to continue doing their job, to get the balance right in life.
Yeah, you raise a good point there. I've heard from contacts in the financial services banking markets as well that obviously recruitment has been really quite slow over the last 12-24 months, and I think that does create an almost a sort of false economy of, well, we're insisting people come back 5 days a week and nobody's leaving. Well, when the markets return, and they will that still hold is going to be a very interesting question. I'm also mindful actually here of, we're focusing at this point on one aspect of well-being in terms of the flexibility of work, and as Damien noted, some people some people perceive that as a given and then look for other aspects. Do you see anything else coming through, Patrick, in terms of factors that are important to people outside of money and days in the office? Is there other things that you are seeing?
Well, interestingly, and it's something that used to get asked in the very early stages of my career, but much less so until recently, is actually hours. What are the hours I'm expected to work? Does it feel fair? Does it feel like, are these going to be long days? Is it unreasonable? Am I going to be working from 8 till 6:30? If I'm commuting on top of that, is that really something I want to do? And then there's also, generally culture. And I think that comes down to the hiring manager and the people that they meet. And, do they feel that they can trust this person with their mental well-being, I suppose? Are they going to be coached, supported? Is it the right person? And let's face it, there are a lot of managers who get pushed into management roles because it's the only way firms can show them development or pay them more money. And they're not qualified nor good at what they do because they haven't been trained. So anyway, it's a deeper conversation, but people really do look at the person, and do they get a sense and comfort from the fact they will be supported, and will they be overworked along the way? Because people, that's still really important, to feel safe that, I'm not walking into something that I'm going to really hate or regret further down the line.
Yeah, 100%. It does. I mean, you raised a very good point there about leadership, and it does bring to mind when I was working on the build out of India for UBS. The visibility of the information these days is so much more. I mean, as I say, I'm coaching people who are looking for new jobs as part of my career coaching. I'm coaching them to be finding out information and looking for information, speaking to people in the organization, to work out, is this the right kind of institution for you? But aside from that kind of manual work, which is done in some cultures, there are other parts of the world where, everyone's on Glassdoor and everyone's writing reviews of how this organization is as an employer. And, they say, certainly this was research that we did at UBS, that one bad review on Glassdoor, you need 10 good ones to really counteract that one bad one. So it's not like you can get away with not being a fair or good employer so much these days. As I say, in times when the market's bad, maybe, but as soon as the market comes back, you're going to be in serious trouble. Do you see anything particularly like that? You see Glassdoor people checking that out much, Patrick, or any other channels?
I think Glassdoor certainly has an impact, and it's not something I come up against that regularly, but I think again it comes down to the person. But it's more about word of mouth. You have someone that's leaving, and they tell their network, and it filters down, and people automatically go on the back foot when you approach them at the role. You say, look, this is an XYZ organization, and they go, sorry, I've heard bad things. And as soon as they've heard that, it's so hard to turn it around, because to change a negative perspective into something positive, unless they get the chance to meet them, it's invariably never going to happen. So I think Glassdoor maybe, but more about, the last thing you want it to do is get out to the market, and that reputation becomes tarnished, and then suddenly you don't believe in your proposition. They don't want to work there, no matter what you promise them. Not even money can answer that type of problem.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's really interesting. I've got a good connection in the accountancy world. Somebody who works with trainee accountants going through that whole stress of working 60, 70-hour weeks and training for their exams on top of that. And I think previous generations, it was sort of, well, that's accepted. The benefits, the payoff that you get with a qualification in accountancy, and the way that you have to work, okay, I'll accept it. But I do sense this sort of change with, I lose track of which generation we have coming through now. I don't know the names. I think Gen Z is it? I'm not sure. But, there seems to be a real rejection of that notion. And that's leading in the accountancy sphere, at least, to, I got to start the overall applications for the accounting industry for the practice firms are 60% down on where they were just 10 years ago, because people are going, 70-hour weeks and then train on top of that. No, thanks. So, these are firms that offer good financial remuneration, and they're having to look at how do we attract the right talent. I mean, I'm not saying that KPMG or Deloitte, PwC, EY, the big four, I'm not saying they're struggling for talent, but it's not just them in that market, and that's certainly the direction I think it's going in.
I think there clearly is a strong link between well-being and look at that holistically, not just work-life balance, but well-being generally, and employer brand, becoming an employer of choice. And I think that certainly I recruit in the non-banking market. So on the other side of the coin, Patrick, I'd say that for commercial non-banking, non-financial services organisations, typically they would believe in 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. So most of their working life they're in the office and collaborating more, and most of their actual life they're at home. So that was a balance usually there. But then again, it also made a huge difference within an organisation in terms of somebody's attitude. So, for example, if a manager were to send an email at 10 o'clock at night, people don't mind. But if they then expect an answer within half an hour, then that could cause issues. I learned myself not to send messages late at night and without the disclaimer at the bottom of the email, I work unusual hours, please reply at a more suitable time. But it's interesting, isn't it, people's perceptions of what is right and what is what's going to make an impact in terms of their own well-being, and for them to feel safe somewhere.
Yeah, and it's this feeling of their well-being mattering and feeling safe, that it's then not just about the can we hire, but once those people are on board, do you actually retain them? Because every company puts best foot forward in a recruitment process and says nice and shiny things, but then when people come in and sort of see the reality of the situation, is that different? Because that then leads to significant turnover. And I think you called out a really good factor in there, Patrick, in terms of management and management training. You so often see sole contributors who've done really well in a job being automatically shoved into management positions, because with the view of, well, you're good at it, tell everyone else how to be good at it. But that's not really effective management, and it doesn't really lead to stability, or I think what the secret sauce is as far as productivity and retention, engagement. You don't really end up with an engaged workforce.
Yeah, 100%. Well, we saw some examples ourselves directly.
We did.
Which it's without the right manager in place, people don't see progression, they don't see development, they don't feel safe. And often some of these things we've been talking around, flexibility and all the things, they can be weaponized back at people in employment, because if your boss is not the right person, who doesn't understand how to coach or encourage or whatever, sometimes these things that you thought were an upside can be used against you, because unless they are clearly and very transparently set in stone, that flexibility can be taken away, or stuff like that. And that's why finding the right culture, the right person, etc., is so important to being able to give everything from within yourself to do the best possible job.
Yeah. There was a stat. It was a Gallup report, and 2 or 3 years ago now, but it was staggering in terms of retention, because it said engaged employees with strong well-being are 59% less likely to look for a new job. Whereas if I look at the stat that Charles put up there earlier, that 58% of employees globally are struggling and 9% are suffering. That doesn't lead to engagement. That doesn't lead to quality work. That doesn't lead to innovation. That just leads to disengagement, disenfranchisement, and departures. I don't know.
Absolutely, I think. Sorry, Matt.
I was just going to ask if Rachel has have got some sort of good examples of where cultures that people are suffering and struggling, where she sees, retention problems and engagement problems.
Yeah, I mean, some stats I find quite shocking actually is that presenteeism, which is defined as kind of showing up for work but not being fully kind of mentally there. If you think about that on the sort of well-being continuum, you're definitely not thriving, probably not fully burnt out, but you're just kind of going through the motions. Costs an organization 35 working days lost per year per person. So there's I think that's absolutely fascinating. So you can actually do the maths and calculate like that by the salaries people earn, and obviously the impact on a business of having people in that state of low well-being and kind of just being in that presenteeism can have a huge impact on the business. So yes, it's not just about retaining those people, but my view is it's also about taking a much more preventative approach to ensure you're taking steps to create a culture that is supporting optimal well-being and supporting people to work in a thriving state, as opposed to just that sort of being half there, being present but not fully there. I think that's something often can easily be swept under the carpet because it's not often visible to employers.
No,
and
always,
and that really links the two comments there in terms of what Rachel said and what Patrick said, is around that awareness of management, because that is something that, particularly among management and leadership, that hasn't been trained, but it can be generally, like, it's difficult to spot. And I mean, I use myself in this example. My burnout was so spectacular. I lost 18 months of my career, and yet 2 weeks before it happened, if you'd asked me if I was okay, I would have said, yeah, I'm all right. And it takes a manager that is, invested in you and understands you and can observe changes in patterns with you, and see somebody who was a top performer all of a sudden not really be, and go, well, what's behind that? It takes that kind of engagement and knowledge of that as good leadership, really, to act. I mean, I saw a fascinating statistic of this very significant proportion of the workforce that are struggling and admit to being stressed on an almost daily basis. Only 1 in 5 will actually say that they've changed their working practice or they've taken time off to address it. Like, it's not going to happen naturally. It needs to be encouraged with leadership, or you're just gonna find your employees, well, myself a case in point. I don't blame UBS for my burnout, but they had a top performing employee who left and they've lost me. So this is what happens. There's an interesting question coming here, actually, that you've put up on the screen there, Damien.
Yeah, so Andrew, thank you for that question. Really appreciate it. So if you could recommend one action to increase engagement and or well-being with employees, what would it be? As somebody who's experienced that burnout, then Matt, what would you say to that? Throwing it back to you.
One action to increase engagement. I think it's, for me, the biggest one that I see and feel and experience is the relationship of feedback. So many people dread their weekly conversation with their manager, if they're lucky enough to have a weekly conversation with their manager. Some organizations, you get your annual appraisal where you get some feedback, and you barely get much more contact time with your manager than that. But even in organizations where they do have that contact time more regularly, if that contact time is just the manager telling you what they want you to do, that's not increasing engagement. That feedback loop about what's going well, what's not going so well, what strategies can we think to work on that, and not it just be a dictatorial, you will do this, but a kind of a collaborative, how do we work on this? What strategies could we think of? Which ones are you going to try? When are you going to review this? When are you going to look at this again? If you've started and it's not really working, okay, you've tried, I can see you've tried something. How are we going to change that? What else are we going to do? That collaborative approach to leadership with regular, frequent one-to-ones. I mean, I do hear from managers that, I can't afford the time to have regular one-to-ones of that nature. Well, frankly, for the sort of the engagement increase that you'll get, you can't afford not to, really, from my perspective. So for me, my one tip is that regular connection and feedback loop being in place. I'll let somebody else have a go.
It's absolutely spot on, I think. That one-to-one, that inclusive leadership, the bit where you're actually taking an interest, not just let's run through the tasks, have you done it, what are you going to do next? It's asking the question, what do you need from me, how can I help? Plus you're doing a really good job, how are you, how's the week been? What hours have you been working? Have you been, is the balance right? Trying to get a sense of your well-being, and are you okay? And I know that's sometimes not the easiest thing to do, but it is all about inclusive leadership, taking an interest in your people. Are they okay? Forget you can see the business stuff happening. If you can't see it, then you're the type of manager who's obviously not paying attention. But it's so easy to miss what is going on with the individual and not asking the right questions.
And I just to build on that, I think those are both great points. And my one thing would be around disclosure. So what I mean by that is disclosure of issues when you're struggling, or even not necessarily struggling, but when things aren't optimal. Having safe spaces to do that should be normalized in organizations and encouraged. And that's hard. And feedback, I think, is one great way of doing that. And through managers is another great way. And the way I work with organizations is through a more formal approach of measuring stress levels using a confidential questionnaire as a safe way of channeling issues, to have practical discussions as teams around the aggregated data. So I think the one thing is all about kind of having these ways and probably multiple channels of surfacing issues before they become complex problems. And I think that's what many wellbeing initiatives kind of fail to take account of. They fail to take account of the personal barriers that people have of speaking up, admitting that they're struggling, that they can't cope, and also some of the cultural barriers. And by culture, I mean both kind of organizational culture that may stop that. People kind of feel it's career limiting sometimes to say that they can't achieve all their tasks or whatever. But also there's country cultures as well. Like I've done a lot of work in Asia. I was based there for 10 years. And there, if a manager would say, how are you doing today? The default answer is always yes, even if people are absolutely on the point of burnout. They are not going to tell you. And so actually I've found the approach of having a confidential questionnaire as a really safe way of channeling people's issues up to management as really effective, actually.
That is really powerful, isn't it? To have that confidentiality and giving people permission to being really open. And I think to back up the point the others are making, I think having managers having real human conversations with people. I know you can't necessarily train empathy, but I think that if you give leaders the skills, tools, and permission to listen, then engagement can really shift in that way. And thank you, Charles, for your view there. So Charles Caller, by the way, has been an HR director for many years and also does a lot of very high impact coaching. and he talks about offering mental health first aid across the board for all employees. So, and Charles says in his former role, he trained over 350 staff in mental health first aid. So I can see that will have a massive impact.
Yeah, and I think it's that. I mean, I'm sticking with my answer of the big thing being the regular feedback loop, but I think the vulnerability in management is also really important. Sets the tone within the organization. One of the people that I really look up to as an organizational leader is Toto Wolff, who, you know, he still does lead an incredibly successful Formula One team, but he is also very, very transparent about his own challenges with mental health. He says, you know, I'm trying to think of his quotes, but to be a good leader, you know, you have to be empathetic, you have to be understanding, and that leaves you vulnerable. That leaves you vulnerable to, you know, taking on these feelings. And he's spoken publicly about, I think he said he's had something like 500 hours in therapy over the last 10, 15 years. And really messaging that it's okay in a managerial position to get that help, and about optimizing himself to do well, not to be covering weakness, but to be optimizing, you know. So I really do believe in that kind of vulnerability in management. I actually had it's funny enough, sometimes I think HR are worse at this than many other functions, but I spoke to an HRD. I was working with an HRD as a client who was struggling, particularly with the kind of pressure coming from above. And her approach within leadership was to be protecting her team. Like, I can't let on to my team how much pressure I'm feeling from above. And we spoke about, well, okay, I'm not suggesting that you sort of give it to them warts and all, but what if you lift the curtain a little bit? What might happen? And she sort of took that away as an action to sort of give a little bit of transparency as to the pressure she was feeling and its impact. And when she came back the next session, how did it go? Oh, well, actually, it was brilliant, because one of my team said they were keen to take on and get some exposure in an area. So if I was struggling a little bit, they'd take that off me and do that for me. And it's like somebody else said they'd help with something else. And all of a sudden I've had this time freed up. And that's not, I mean, obviously that was care for the manager, but that's also about the employees having opportunity to take things on as well. So I do think, you know, it's not just this, and this is where I kind of leave on to the next thing that I wanted us to talk about. It's not just about the how are you an attractive employer to for candidates to join, or how do you minimize turnover. It's actually the commercial benefit that you get from a healthy, happy, engaged workforce. I don't know if anyone else has any sort of particular points on that one.
Well, I think commercially spending less money on recruiting certainly benefits an organisation, and having people actually show up to work.
Don't be saying that too much for Patrick. You know,
I was going to say
he needs to be spending money.
Depends on the recruiter, I think.
But... Absolutely, I think that, and I think also though, for the right organisation, you spend money on recruitment, rightly so, make that investment, and then you want them to stay. And then as the organisation grows and expands, you can invest more into other recruiters. But I think the key thing is how people working for you who aren't working for you is a massive issue. And I think Charles talked about quiet quitting in one of his comments, and I think that's a really powerful one as well. And I think that if people are employed and being paid money who are doing the bare minimum and disconnected from their jobs, clearly you're not getting good return investment on paying their salary, are you? So commercially, it's very important.
Yeah, this is sort of the presenteeism you're talking about, isn't it, really, Rachel?
Yeah, and I think to build on that, it's also the commercial benefit is also around the risk that companies are under when they have collections of employees who are under too much stress, because what we do know is that people under undue stress behave irrationally, it skews their decision making, they lose their sense of perspective. I mean, a lot of the big financial scandals have been linked to, and cyber crimes have been linked to too much pressure and stress. There's a lot of data out there that does illustrate that link, and in the worst cases as well, if an employee is driven to suicide, which unfortunately does happen in some cases, the reputational risk for a company and damage to their brand is absolutely huge. So I think the commercial benefit has to also consider the risk aspect and the need to manage the negative impact that low well-being or undue stress can have.
Yeah, 100%. It's it's from both sides of it, isn't it? It's the risk that you run as an organization of people not being well and happy through that, as you say, very tragically, sort of, if there is a suicide or a death related to the work, that's going to have massive implications. But just this also on the flip side, you're not getting your best from your people.
No.
You pay them to be the best that they can be, and then you're not creating the conditions where that optimal performance actually flourishes or thrives. I mean, again, I'd refer back to something Patrick said about something we experienced about, I can think of very differing environments within the one company where in certain leadership you feel really motivated and connected and you want to do your best, and that's not being told to do your best. It's because you feel you want to, and you're really engaged and you want to go that extra mile and do that bit more, versus how when leadership isn't as keyed into that, doesn't really understand that you just get tension and frustration, and you start to see the sort of disengagement and the disenfranchisement and performance dropping and these sort of aspects.
And what we do know from psychology is that when you are under stress, that we go into kind of fight or flight, and our brain, our cognitive functioning declines. It's a survival mechanism, and it can impact your ability to remember things, to think creatively, to make clear decisions, and also it affects your relationships with others. You become irritable and lose empathy, as we've talked about earlier. So having people in an optimal state of well-being is not just a nice to have. It actually affects people's ability to innovate, to come up with creative ideas, to make good decisions, to relate well. All these characteristics that you want, and companies should be striving to encourage in their employees.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there was a stat from Gallup. I keep trotting out these stats, but there was a stat from Gallup that that optimal kind of working relationship where people are engaged with those teams and those businesses that get that engagement, the company's 21% more profitable. It is a real commercial benefit. And one of the guys that I've referenced, Toto Wolff, somebody else that I admire and see doing really well in business, obviously, is Richard Branson, with all the success he's had down the years. And he's been saying for 20 years plus, he wrote it in one of his books, and then you can see him saying it again in various speeches, that the customer does not come first. Put your employees as number one, look after them, and they will look after your clients. You've got somebody of his stature and business success saying that that's so critical for him that you wonder why doesn't everybody consider it like that?
Yeah. And ironically, the customers will get a better experience when you put the employees first.
Yeah, I think we've all spoken to to somebody on a customer service help desk who you can tell they're pissed off and annoyed, and you get the end of that when you're trying to tell them what's wrong or why it's not working, versus when you get somebody who's happy, night and day on the customer service, right?
Absolutely. It makes such a difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. So we're coming towards the sort of the last 15 minutes, and we had that great question earlier on from Andrew about, what one action would increase engagement and things like that. But I guess a key thing that I want to sort of, start to round it up with is actually, what does good look like? You see and hear a lot of kind of things where you think, well, that's just an exercise that's ticking the box,
Yeah.
Have you got a yoga program? Tick, done. Well, that's well-being sorted. Or free fruit in the canteen. These are sort of the more holistic methods. But what does actual effective well-being initiatives, what do they look like?
And I think key part of that is, as I say, you can have that tokenism, can't you, in so many organisations. I think it boils down to three things. Is it authentic? Like, do you actually mean it? Is there consistency? And is there follow through? So, for example, if they're flexible work policies, are they genuinely supported by leaders in terms of how those leaders work? If flexible work policies exist on paper, but realistically people touch when you leave the office at a certain time, then it's going to make a big difference, isn't it? And I think when in organisations, I see real impact happens when initiatives are backed by data, championed by the leadership themselves, and the employees actually experience it.
Yeah, I think in saying the same thing in a different way, it's about transparency. Codifying something that you believe in. If you really believe in it and it's there, then it has to be front and center. It's like your values, so to speak. If we have flexibility, this is the flexibility. You don't need to answer to anyone or justify yourself. If you want it, you're going to use it. It is there. This is what we expect. And people, certainly leaders should be role modeling that, so everyone feels it's the right thing and an acceptable thing to do. Very often, well, certainly in organizations that I've worked in, we talk about this type of thing, but you don't see the leadership doing it, because they're all trying to prove to one another that, I don't need that, or it's if I do, it's a sign of weakness. It shouldn't be. Having that type of thing is really important, and people role modeling is just as important.
I think that question on that point on transparency is really important as well. In order to be truly transparent, you need the data, and that's where I really like some of what you're doing, Rachel, with the data that your tool can gather. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, in my view, one of the biggest issues that needs to be addressed is the issue of stress. And some stress is good and very positive in a system, but too much stress, and when it's left unmanaged and unaddressed, can be bad and lead to burnout. And I think it's a very difficult and complex issue to address, but there are now developments in the field that can measure stress in a practical way, and I think that's really the key. And I think measuring stress has to be done in a very confidential way. And the approach I take with an organization is much like you would do an engagement survey. You complete a scientific psychometric to measure your stress levels, to highlight signs. So it builds that personal awareness at the employee level. They get their confidential report. And then it's aggregated at the management level so that they can see what the common issues are, as a basis and a platform for conversation and practical actions. And it is really, to your point about that transparency and surfacing those issues in a safe yet very practical way. And then in the kind of middle layer as well, you also have to recognize that in different geographies, different teams, different departments, they're all going to have different challenges and different issues. So there's no silver bullet. And where I've seen a lot of organizations not do this well, or not their wellbeing programs not work so well is when they've just kind of implemented flexible working as the silver bullet, when actually in some areas kind of employees have said, hang on a minute, that's not the problem. The problem is we've got unachievable goals, or there's the competitor, too many competitors, and we've got it's a workload issue. So that's not going to work. So it's also about kind of enabling those differences in different teams and geographies to be surfaced as well. And that can be done through, again, a data-driven approach and having practical reporting and analysis at that level, which again just forms the basis of an action planning workshop, and also empowers teams and business heads to co-create the solutions themselves. So it's not just a top-down management view of what's going to support their well-being, but they're coming up with the solutions themselves. So that's sort of the way I've worked with organizations, and it's really about, for me, taking a systematic approach. It's not about putting the onus on the individual or the senior management team. It's got to, that both levels have to be done in parallel. So it's about individuals taking responsibility for their well-being and implementing some healthy habits and so forth. But it's also about the organization recognizing some of the workplace risk factors and proactively addressing those.
In terms of what else, I guess, good looks like, we've spoken about a few things here in terms of, the management, the transparency, the vulnerability in leadership, the starting with the data, and making sure you understand the picture truly. As you said, Rachel, it's no good fixing one problem if that isn't the problem that's actually the underlying cause. Is there anything else that anyone's seen as sort of really impacting employee well-being and creating benefit in terms of what good looks like?
I think sort of linked to what we've been talking as well is the psychological safety. I think, it is about really creating cultures where, again, disclosure of issues is normalized. So I think a lot of that can be done through manager training. As the age-old saying goes, you don't leave a job, you leave a manager. But what we do know, then there's a lot of data on this, that actually your manager has the greatest impact on your well-being over anything else, in a positive way and negative way. So I think I've also seen organizations who've done some really practical training with managers on how to have difficult conversations and empathetic conversations with employees, how to give really good feedback, to your point, Matt, and just giving them the practical skills to do that on a day-to-day basis has been really impactful.
Yeah, I would certainly echo that as well.
Something I found. Sorry, Patrick, you're about to chime in.
No, I'm just agreeing. No, I'm just agreeing with the point.
I'd say a massive fan of what Rachel says about those confidential surveys and understanding what people are saying. Something I've also done for organisations, taken surveys of people, not only when they leave, but after they've left. So if organisations have quite a high turnover, one thing we at Talent Diagnostic Solutions do is go back to people who left the organisation, and often you'll get a much more brutally honest answer than they're going to give their HR manager when they actually leave. And I find some people really opened up and said, to be honest, we told them this when we left, but actually A, B, and C were the real issues. So I think sometimes, going back to what you said earlier, Matt, don't assume what the issue is. Don't assume it's, for example, how many days a week they work in the office, but really understand what people are saying, both the people who work there and the people who left, because often it's good to hear their voice too.
And I think the measurement-based approach also helps create a common language to discuss the issues. Most people know what the issues are, but most people can't really pinpoint or name them. So I think that's also the power of using that approach. And I've had that feedback from companies I've worked with a lot, is actually like, oh, I didn't quite know exactly, you know, how to sort of name that issue, and having that language and looking at that data as a team or organization or as a collective can be a really helpful, just platform to have really practical discussions in a non-personal way as well. So I think it is all about enabling employees to talk about these issues and have those practical conversations. And that's the biggest feedback I've had from the organizations I've worked with about, gosh, you know, it was just so, we all knew what these issues were, but it was so powerful having them out in the open and having a really practical discussion around that. And I think, you know, the other point I might make is I think it's interesting. I've worked with a lot of companies who have a huge wellbeing teams, and they have a sort of Aladdin's cave of wellbeing resources. And then employees have kind of said, I just don't know what's relevant for me, you know, and so they don't use them. They get very low usage because they're like, yeah, we know, but how do I know what I need to do or what to use? So again, the measurement-based approach and having a tool like My Tool Aura is helpful, because it actually builds that awareness for individuals. And what I have seen it work very well to do is through having a personal report, which kind of gives you an insight into your risk level and where your focus areas may be. They sort of suddenly realize, oh my gosh, maybe I am on the path to burnout and I do need to do something. And also, oh, okay, this is the particular resource that might be most helpful for me, or this is the particular aspect of my well-being that I might want to focus on. And one client I worked with, they saw the usage of their well-being sort of toolkit library go up by 30% after we did our program, which they actually found quite fascinating. And it was all just actually building employee awareness, which stimulates their motivation to take action, actually.
Start using it.
Yeah. I mean, you see so many sort of stats that, and I can't exactly think of what they are at the moment, but you know, the usage of EAP, like firms say, oh yeah, we've got an employee assistance program, tick, box done, and yet nobody's using it. And so much of that is around awareness of what it actually is and what it can provide.
Yeah, and also awareness of whether you need it yourself. Often when you're on that path to burnout, for example, and you don't often see the problem yourself. We do know that you go through a kind of denial phase. It's not about me, it's about everyone else. Therefore, you're not most people aren't likely to seek that help until, unfortunately, they're far down that path at the crisis point. So the more organizations can do to encourage kind of preventative approaches and early action, the better. So when companies can enable early awareness of these issues, that will encourage employees to kind of seek help earlier and take a more preventative approach.
Absolutely. And their comments here from Charles about re-emphasising the point about psychological safety, and Andrew Tucker alluding to your point, Rachel, about blanket solutions, so about how it's often easy just to roll out a blanket solution rather than to truly understand what's required. We're coming up to an hour. So I wondered if we might all have our, one final thought for people to take away on here. I was going to say, Matt, first of all, what would you say would be your people should take away with them to summarise this today?
I think it's, for me, it's about the commercial imperative of it. I keep going back to this. Like, this isn't about just being able to hire good people or retain good people. It's about the fact that if the good people are there and they're engaged, your company benefits. I'd close with a stat that I got about, for every $1 invested in well-being, it delivers an ROI of $5 through improved productivity and reduced absence. So that's my one.
Patrick, how about you? What would you say is your final takeaway for people watching this?
I think about 7 different things down, so we probably don't have time to cover all of them. And But I suppose the overriding thing is, well-being shouldn't be a perk. The thing I was researching earlier, it should be around, that should be the operating model that supports everyone, that you can talk about, you can sell around, and it's so intrinsic, as Matt said, to the commercial success and happiness of your people. And we said, if everyone's happy, they're going to do a good job. And if you get that right, and I do think it's around the management and the leadership and that relationship that they can have, creating that safe space. So I think that's so important, particularly if you're a recruiter. If you can go out there and talk about the leadership, the management, the culture in such a positive way, attracting talent is so much easier.
Absolutely. Rachel, what would your parting words be on this subject?
Well, it's a bit cheesy, but I would say if you can't see it, then you can't manage it. So I would highlight the importance of measurement of stress, and I truly believe that actually companies should be measuring stress and placing as much, if not more, on measuring stress than they do on engagement, because of the risk that it creates for a company, and also the benefits of having employees of being able to manage their stress levels adequately. So yeah, that would be my passing comment. Companies should really have these systematic ways of measuring stress and enabling people to disclose their issues early.
Thank you for that. And my takeaway, I suppose I would say to people, well-being should not be seen as a program or an add-on, but a core part of strategy, culture, and leadership. And I think a question I'd leave to any employers watching this is, what one step can you take tomorrow to make well-being more than a policy, but a real experience for your people? So I'll leave that with you all. Thank you for all who joined here today. Thank you to the panelists. And we're now going to be ending the live stream, but thank you all for being here today.
Just before we do, Damien, to that point around what one step can managers do, I'm just very conscious that Rachel has an event in the next couple of days that might be good for managers to attend if they want an idea.
Yes,
that's very true.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, anybody who is in Cheapside in central London on Thursday, I know it's only in 2 days' time, but if you do have time, I'm running an event on how to build a culture of high performance without burnout. So if you're interested in kind of seeing the Aura tool in action, we're going to be working around a case study of an organization. So it's going to be quite a hands-on practical session. And if you want more information about that or would like to come along, then there's a link on my LinkedIn profile, which you can see, and feel free to come along.
Lovely. Rachel, could you put a link to that on the comments under this event as well?
I will do, yes. Thanks.
And those of you living in the cultural capital of England, which is Bradford-on-Avon near Bath, I'm actually going to be speaking at an event on the 5th of November, so an easy date to remember, talking about employee engagement. So anyone near the Bath, Bristol, Southwest England area, then feel free to come along to that event too. Thanks everyone for joining in. Any other events we can talk about now? Or
one last one I'm going to throw in, 7th of November in Royal Tunbridge Wells, about how to manage performance so that burnout is not impacting your organisation. That's an in-person half-day workshop on Friday the 7th in Tunbridge Wells, 7th of November, I should say.
Fantastic. Let's have links to all of these in the comments below.
I will do. And Patrick, how do we get hold of you if we want to hire good, diverse talent?
Well, find me on LinkedIn. I'm there, ready to help and support.
Brilliant. All right.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.